NBC News special report. Here is Connie Chung in New York.
Good afternoon. In just a few moments, Douglas Ginsburg is expected to announce he is withdrawing his name as President Reagan's nominee to the Supreme Court. Let us go now live to the White House, where White House spokesman Marlon Fitzwater I believe, was about to introduce Justice Ginsburg. Well, we will come back to that in just a moment. Chris Wallace is there, and I'll be talking with him in just a minute. Ginsburg had admitted Thursday that he had smoked marijuana in the 60s and as recently as 1979 while he was a professor of Harvard Law School. And yesterday, Education Secretary William Bennett called Ginsburg and urged him to withdraw his name. President Reagan, who had earlier indicated he would stand by his nominee, said in an interview yesterday that he might not have chosen Ginsburg had he known about the marijuana use. And Ginsburg's support among conservatives on Capitol Hill was beginning to erode. His supporters became his detractors. And liberals, oddly enough, were defending his marijuana use, calling it irrelevant, most of them, but still critical of the extent of his qualifications, his experience. White House correspondent Chris Wallace is there now. Chris, what can you tell us?
Well, we're told that at 2:55, Connie, that Judge Ginsburg will come out and make a written, read a statement in which he will announce that he is withdrawing his nomination to the Supreme Court. He has been here at the White House for the last 15 or 20 minutes going over language with White House officials, and it is, of course, reminiscent of that time about a month ago when Judge Bohr came here on a Friday afternoon to say that he was going to stay in the contest here in the White House briefing room. So we do expect that in about 6 minutes from now. We are told that Judge Ginsburg called the president at Camp David at 11:30 this morning and asked that his nomination be withdrawn. This came after just a steady drum roll in the last 44 hours of demands from conservatives, especially that Ginsburg withdraw after the revelation that he had indeed smoked marijuana in the 1960s and 70s. White House and administration officials tell NBC News that the new front-runner for the job, the new front-runner to replace Justice Powell as the Supreme Court Justice, is federal Judge Anthony Kennedy. Kennedy, as you may remember, was one of the two final candidates along with Ginsburg, and the president chose 9 days ago. It's amazing it happened so quickly. Just 9 days ago, chose Ginsburg over Kennedy. We're told that at this point, Kennedy is now the front-runner for the job.
Chris, Howard Baker had never been in favor of Ginsburg. Was it Kennedy who Howard Baker was pushing ever since this latest incident occurred with Ginsburg?
I'm sorry, ask your question again if you could, Connie. There's quite a lot of noise here.
Howard Baker had never supported Ginsburg, and was it Kennedy that he was supporting and was pushing this time around?
That's right. In fact, what it came down to is a kind of climactic meeting in the Oval Office at 9:30 on the Thursday 9 days ago, with the president meeting with Chief of Staff Howard Baker and also with Attorney General Meese. Baker was pushing federal Judge Kennedy, among other reasons, because he said he would be more confirmable. He's in his 50s, has a longer record on the court, but Meese said that you needed a true believer and that this was going to perhaps be the last chance of the president to tip the balance of the court, and he believed that Ginsburg would be a conservative. So there was quite a battle right there, and a number of White House officials were not very happy with that choice, felt that the president had gone for ideology over practical politics, and at a time when he was fighting on a host of issues, that he has a summit upcoming with Mikhail Gorbachev, when he's fighting Congress over the budget, when he's also dealing with him on the Contras, that the last thing he needed was another bitter, divisive battle over the Supreme Court. But the president decided that this would, in fact, be his last chance to try to find a judge who was agreed with his judicial philosophy and could go on the court, tip the balance of the court, and so he went with Ginsburg. And I have to tell you, there are an awful lot of people here in the White House who are very unhappy that the president made that choice and precipitated the last 9 days, which are really something of a humiliation for this administration.
But never did the administration expect to find this particular disclosure concerning marijuana. The FBI had done background checks, interviewed a number of people, but nothing turned up. Nothing turned up. And in addition to that, Chris, isn't it true that Ginsburg was questioned and asked if there was anything embarrassing in his background? And he said only his relations with his ex-wife could prove embarrassing and didn't reveal the marijuana use.
Well, we are told that, Connie, and in fact there is some second-guessing and some animus against Ginsburg today, some feeling here at the White House and in the Justice Department that Ginsburg didn't come clean, that he was asked, is there anything in your record, sort of the final question, is there anything in your record that could be embarrassing? and that could come back and hurt this nomination, and that Ginsburg did just mention his personal relations with his ex-wife. He did not mention the use of marijuana in the 60s or 70s, and there's some feeling that, as one White House official here today was saying, you've got to know at this point, in this day and age, with the pursuit of Democrats in the Senate and also with what happens here in the media, if there's anything embarrassing out there, it's going to come out. So tell us sooner rather than have it come out later.
And, Chris, while we're on the question of embarrassment, it is embarrassing for President Reagan in light of the First Lady's campaign against drugs.
We are also told that Mrs. Reagan was also very upset about this. In fact, we just had a conversation with one White House official, a conservative, who was saying that he was talking...
Judge Ginsburg will be here in 2 minutes.
Well, you may have just heard the announcement here in the briefing room that Judge Ginsburg will be in the briefing room in 2 minutes, that Education Secretary Bennett talked with this conservative official here at the White House yesterday, and one of the things they discussed was that the revelation of Ginsburg's marijuana use was a disaster for the anti-drug program. How could Mrs. Reagan and the president and members of the administration go out and just say no to drugs at a time when they were appointing someone to a lifetime position on the highest court in the land who admitted to using drugs? So that was a consideration.
All right. Chris, also, Ginsburg's disclosure of his marijuana use has prompted other true confessions. Senator Albert Gore, a Democratic presidential candidate, admitted that he smoked marijuana several times during college and while serving in the Army in Vietnam, but he said he has not used marijuana for the past 12 years. And Georgia Republican Congressman Newt Gingrich revealed that he smoked marijuana once, almost 2 decades ago, and he said it didn't have any effect on him. In just a few moments, as Chris Wallace has been reporting, Douglas Ginsburg is expected to announce that he's withdrawing his name as President Reagan's nominee to the Supreme Court. Chris Wallace also reports that Anthony Kennedy of California will probably be the nominee. Chris Wallace, you're still there. Can you tell me when you think Kennedy will be named as the nominee?
Just to correct you, we're not saying he's going to be the nominee. We're saying he is the front runner, and I think anyone who has followed the extraordinary process by which the president has chosen these 2 earlier nominees would say, let's be very cautious and wait to see who he finally chooses. The White House is saying they want to get this thing out quickly to end the Ginsburg flap and get people focusing on a new nominee, and at this point they're saying look to early next week.
All right. Thank you, Chris. I misspoke that. William Wilkins is another under consideration from South Carolina.
Yeah, that would be another choice. He was, we were told, the 3rd nominee. He was being pushed especially by Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, who said that there should be a Southerner on the bench. There is not now one. On the other hand, the feeling here at the White House is that there were a number of Southern Democrats who went against Bork on the grounds there should have been a Southerner, and if you did, in fact, put a Southerner on, it would be rewarding people who had gone against the White House. So I'd have to say again, although it's certainly not by any stretch a done deal, that Anthony Kennedy, sources tell NBC News, is the clear front-runner at this point for the nomination.
All right. And President Reagan had said in an interview that he did yesterday that of those 3, at the time when he was considering Ginsburg, Kennedy, and Wilkins of South Carolina, his quote was, "Sometimes I thought you could have put their names on the wall and thrown a dart."
Well, I'm sure there's some people here at the White House who wish that he had thrown a dart at Ginsburg and not chosen him instead. We're told now that Marlon Fitzwater and Judge Ginsburg are coming in, so let's go to that.
Thank you, Chris.
I have today asked President Reagan not to forward my nomination to the Supreme Court. I was deeply honored to have been chosen by the President and will always be grateful to him. I was looking forward to sharing with the American people my views about justice and about the role of the courts in our society. Unfortunately, all of the attention has been focused on our personal lives, and much of that on events of many years ago. My views on the law and on what kind of Supreme Court justice I would make have been drowned out in the clamor. The President and Mrs. Reagan deserve enormous credit for leading the fight against illegal drugs. I fully support their effort, and I hope that the young people of this country, including my own daughters, will learn from my mistake and heed their message. For my part, I plan to continue to serve on the Court of Appeals for many years to come and to uphold the principles of our Constitution. Thank you.
What does the President say? The FBI.
Okay.
Thank you.
Judge Douglas Ginsburg, as expected, announced that he is withdrawing his name as a nominee to the Supreme Court. He said that he had been looking forward to sharing his views, but too much attention had been focused on his personal life, and it had all been drowned out, his views and his experience. Chris Wallace, are you ready to talk with us now? Well,
I am indeed.
Very brief, but he said it all. He said that young people, he hopes, will heed urgings by the President and Mrs. Reagan to not use drugs. Chris?
Yeah, yes, and we do have some more news for you, Connie. We've just had a statement issued, a written statement from the President. Let me read it to you. It says, "With regret, I have received today Judge Ginsburg's decision to withdraw his name from further consideration. Judge Ginsburg believes that a prolonged confirmation process will not benefit the nation or the court. I commended Judge Ginsburg for his record and qualifications when I announced his selection, and I commend his selflessness and clear thinking now. I will move promptly to name another nominee to fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court." And if you read behind those lines, it really says it all, that the White House simply felt that they could not take another bitter battle as they had on Robert Bork that would carry this thing over well into December, possibly into next year, and that the Ginsburg nomination had been fatally damaged, and the best thing to do simply was to acknowledge that, to withdraw the nomination, and to put out another name very quickly.
Chris, it's really a quick end for Ginsburg. It was only 9 days ago that he was nominated, and with the Bork nomination and how it went, White House officials must be wondering how they could have allowed another botched attempt to occur.
Well, there is a lot of second-guessing here. Of course, people at the White House say they didn't allow it to occur. In fact, it was the Justice Department. There's a lot, quite frankly, of finger-pointing here, saying this was Ed Meese's choice, that Howard Baker, the White House chief of staff, was against it. Not that he knew about the drug taking, but that he felt that this man had so little in the way of a positive record, and that there were some negative things out there about him, that it was simply too chancy a nomination, and that at a time when, as I said earlier, when there were so many things that, so many battles that the president had to fight, that this was the last thing he needed. So there is some feeling of finger-pointing here, as I said earlier, some feeling that Ginsburg did not come clean in the screening process, and then in addition that Ed Meese did not exercise his best judgment. But in the end, you know, it really does come down to the president. He was in the room with Meese and Baker when they went over the names. He was given the choice of Kennedy, who was considered more moderate, had a better record, or a longer record in any case, and was thought to be easily confirmable. And it was the president who decided in the end to go with Judge Ginsburg.
All right, Chris Wallace, thank you very much, Chris. Once again, you say that the front runner, according to your White House sources, is Anthony Kennedy of California. When will an announcement, do you think, will be made?
Well, we are told again, the president in his statement said that he will move promptly to name another nominee to fill the vacancy. Senior officials are telling NBC News to look to sometime early next week.
All right. Thank you very much. Chris Wallace reporting live from the White House. Once again, Douglas Ginsburg has withdrawn his name as a nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court. President Reagan is expected to announce a replacement, a new nominee, sometime early next week. We'll have more on this story tonight on NBC Nightly News. Be sure to join us then. I'm Connie Chung, NBC News, New York.